Jake Morrison sat in the back row of the xenobiology classroom, his long legs stretched out under the curved desk. The chair was too small for his human frame, designed for the average galactic species that stood about 4 feet tall. He had gotten used to being the giant in most rooms since arriving at Nexus Prime Academy 3 months ago. The classroom buzzed with quiet chatter in a dozen different languages. Jake recognized some of the sounds by now. The clicking noises came from Zara, the crystalline Vorthan student whose body looked like living glass. She was talking to Crix, the furry Quillen whose large ears twitched when he was nervous. Crix looked like a 6-foot rabbit that had learned to walk on 2 legs and wear clothes. Near the front, 3 Zalorian students whispered in their musical language. They had pale blue skin and white hair that moved like it was underwater. Their large eyes never seemed to blink, which still made Jake uncomfortable even after months of classes together. The door at the front of the room opened with a soft hiss. Professor Veltar walked in carrying a data pad and what looked like a portable hologram projector. She was Zephyrian, with gray skin that had a metallic shine, and 4 arms that moved independently of each other. Her face had no nose, just 2 small holes where a human nose would be. Her mouth was wide and filled with flat teeth that marked her as a plant eater. "Good morning, students," Professor Veltar said in the common galactic language. Her voice had a slight buzz to it, like she was talking through a radio with poor reception. The chatter in the room stopped immediately. Jake had learned that most alien species had much stronger respect for authority than humans did. Back on Earth, students would keep talking until the teacher actually started teaching. "Today we will study something very important," the professor continued, setting up her hologram projector on the central table. "We will learn about the most dangerous predator species in our galaxy. This knowledge will help you understand threats you may face in your future diplomatic careers." Jake perked up with interest. He had been hoping to learn more about alien life forms, especially the dangerous ones. Back on Earth, he had loved watching nature documentaries about sharks, lions, and other predators. The idea of seeing alien versions made him excited. Crix's ears drooped and pressed flat against his head. The Quillen's nose twitched rapidly, a sign that he was scared. Around the room, other students shifted uncomfortably. A few exchanged worried looks. "Now, I know this subject may be disturbing for some of you," Professor Veltar said, her forearms moving as she spoke. "Your homeworlds have been peaceful for thousands of years. Most of you have never seen a true predator. But the galaxy is a dangerous place, and knowledge is your best defense." She looked around the room, her large dark eyes stopping on each student. When her gaze reached Jake, she paused. He was sitting forward in his chair, hands folded on his desk, looking eager to start. "I want you all to understand that what you will see today represents the worst nightmares of civilized species," the professor continued. "These creatures have terrorized entire star systems. They have driven whole civilizations to extinction." A Trilaxian student near the middle of the room raised a thin tentacle. "Professor, are you sure we need to see these things? Could we not just read about them?" Professor Veltar's mouth curved in what Jake had learned was the Zephyrian version of a smile. "I understand your concern, Dexhai, but seeing is different from reading. You need to understand what real terror looks like." Jake glanced around the room and noticed that several students looked like they might be sick. The 3 Zalorians had moved their chairs closer together. Crix was gripping the edges of his desk so hard that his knuckles showed white through his fur. "Before we begin," the professor said, "I want you all to remember that these recordings come from military archives. The creatures you will see have killed millions of beings. Some of them can destroy entire planets." She activated the hologram projector. The lights in the room dimmed automatically. In the center of the room, a 3-dimensional image appeared, showing the rotating logo of the Galactic Military Archive. "Our first specimen," Professor Veltar announced, "comes from the dark regions beyond the Outer Rim. This species has a 97% success rate when hunting. They have never been known to show mercy." Jake leaned forward even more, his eyes bright with curiosity. This was going to be interesting. He wondered if these alien predators would be as impressive as Earth's big cats or as clever as Earth's pack hunters. Behind him, he heard a soft whimpering sound. One of the Trilaxian students was already crying. and the professor had not even shown them anything yet. "Remember," Professor Veltar said, her voice becoming more serious. "What you are about to see represents the pinnacle of evolutionary killing efficiency. These are not mere animals, they are death itself given form and purpose." The hologram flickered, preparing to show the first specimen. Around the room, students held their breath or covered their eyes. Some whispered prayers in their native languages. Jake Morrison, the human from Earth, smiled and waited to see what the galaxy considered truly frightening. The first hologram materialized in the center of the classroom. It showed a creature that looked like a cross between a giant spider and a shadow made solid. The thing stood 8 feet tall on 6 legs that ended in claws sharp enough to cut through metal. Its body seemed to shift and blur as if it was not entirely there. "The Kethmori Shadow Stalker," Professor Veltar announced. "This creature can phase through solid matter at will. It hunts by materializing inside its prey's body and tearing them apart from within." Several students made choking sounds. Crix let out a high-pitched squeak and covered his eyes with his furry hands. One of the Zalorian students fainted and slumped over in their chair. Jake tilted his head and studied the hologram with interest. The creature reminded him of something from a horror movie he had seen back on Earth. Pretty cool looking, he thought. The phasing ability was definitely more advanced than anything Earth had produced, but the basic predator design was familiar. Note, the elongated claws. The professor continued, using a light pointer to highlight different parts of the creature. Each claw contains a paralytic venom that keeps the prey alive while being consumed. The Kethmori prefer their food to be aware of what is happening to them. More students got up and left the classroom. The door hissed open and closed repeatedly, as nearly half the class fled. Those who remained looked pale and shaky. Jake pulled out his tablet and started taking notes. He wrote down details about the phasing ability and wondered how it worked. Did the creature shift between dimensions, or did it somehow alter its molecular density? Both options were scientifically fascinating. "Our second specimen," Professor Veltar said, noticing that Jake was the only student still paying full attention, "is from the volcanic world of Paraxis 4. The hologram changed to show a massive serpent-like creature with scales that glowed like molten metal. It had to be at least 200 feet long and thick as a subway train. Wings spread from its back, each one large enough to block out the sun. Its mouth opened to reveal rows of teeth and a throat that glowed with internal fire. The draconic flame worm, the professor explained. This creature can melt through the hull of a battle cruiser with its breath. Its scales are harder than diamond and its bite can crush a tank." Crix whimpered from behind his hands. "Why are we learning about these things? Why do they exist?" 2 more students left the room, looking green around their equivalent of gills. Zara, the crystalline Vorthon, flickered rapidly through different colors, which Jake had learned meant she was extremely distressed. Jake yawned and stretched his arms above his head. The dragon was impressive, sure, but it looked pretty much like every dragon from fantasy movies and video games. He had been hoping for something more alien, maybe with some unusual biology or hunting methods. "The flame worm hunts by diving from orbit," Professor Veltar continued. "It can survive in the vacuum of space and often destroys entire cities by landing on them. It then feeds on the mineral content of the buildings and the organic matter of any survivors." Jake raised his hand. "Professor, how does its metabolism work? I mean, that's a lot of mass to maintain. It must need enormous amounts of food to survive." The professor stared at him. Around the room, the remaining students turned to look at Jake like he had grown a second head. He was asking technical questions about a creature that had just been described as a city destroyer. That is, Professor Veltar seemed confused by the question. "The metabolism is not the important point, Jake Morrison. The important point is that this creature kills everything it encounters." "Right, but from an evolutionary perspective, that seems inefficient," Jake continued. "If it kills everything, what does it eat when it runs out of prey? There has to be some kind of sustainable food source or the species would have gone extinct." Crix peeked through his fingers to stare at Jake. The human was discussing the monster like it was just another animal, not the stuff of nightmares. "Moving on," the professor said quickly, changing the hologram again. "Our third specimen represents perhaps the most horrifying form of predation in the known galaxy. The new image showed what looked like a swarm of insects, each one about the size of a house cat. They had metallic shells and moved in perfect synchronization. The hologram showed thousands of them flowing across a planet's surface like a living tide of destruction. The hive mind devourers, Professor Veltar announced. A single swarm can strip an entire world of all organic matter in less than a week. They work as one mind with perfect coordination. Nothing can hide from them. Nothing can escape them. The few remaining students made horrified noises. Zara's light patterns became so chaotic that she looked like a disco ball having a seizure. One of the Trilaxian students started crying again. Jake leaned forward and squinted at the hologram. "They look kind of like locusts," he said thoughtfully. "Do they have any natural predators? And how do they reproduce? If they eat everything organic, they must have some way to avoid eating their own eggs or larvae." "Jake Morrison," Professor Veltar said, her voice becoming sharp. "These are not ordinary insects. These are instruments of total planetary destruction." "Oh, I get that," Jake said cheerfully. "I'm just curious about the biology. Back on Earth, we had locust swarms that could destroy entire agricultural regions, but they were limited by food supply and breeding cycles. These guys seem to have solved those problems somehow." The professor's forearms moved in agitation. This was not going as planned. Her other students were properly terrified, but the human was treating galactic horror stories like a nature documentary. "Perhaps," she said, "you need to see something truly terrifying to understand the seriousness of this subject." Jake perked up. "Are there more? This is really interesting stuff." Around the room, the few students who remained looked at Jake Morrison like he was the most frightening thing in the classroom. Professor Veltar's forearms moved to her control panel with sharp, angry motions. Only 6 students remained in the classroom now, and 5 of them looked like they wanted to run away but were too scared to move. The 6th student, the human, was still taking notes and looking excited. "Very well," the professor said, her voice taking on a darker tone. "If standard galactic nightmares do not impress you, perhaps we should examine something that exists beyond normal reality." The hologram flickered and changed. What appeared in the center of the room made the remaining alien students gasp in terror. Even Zara, who communicated through light, went completely dark. The creature in the hologram was hard to look at directly. It seemed to exist in more dimensions than the 3-dimensional projection could properly show. Parts of it faded in and out of view. It had too many eyes, and they appeared in places where eyes should not exist. Its limbs bent in ways that hurt to watch, folding through angles that did not make sense. "The Void Reaper," Professor Veltar announced. "This entity exists partially outside our space-time continuum. It feeds on the life force of entire star systems. When a Void Reaper arrives in a solar system, all life within 12 light-years begins to die slowly." Crix fell off his chair and curled up in a ball on the floor. His fur stood up all over his body, and he was making small squeaking noises. The 3 remaining Zalorian students were holding each other and whispering prayers. Jake leaned forward and studied the hologram carefully. "Fascinating," he said. "So it exists in multiple dimensions simultaneously? That would explain why it looks so weird. Our 3-dimensional brains are not designed to process multi-dimensional objects." "It kills everything," the professor said, her voice becoming desperate. "Everything, Jake Morrison. Entire civilizations have been wiped out by a single Void Reaper. Planets become empty wastelands. Stars themselves burn out and die." "Right. But how does the energy transfer work?" Jake asked, pulling out a stylus to make more notes. "If it feeds on life force, there must be some kind of quantum mechanism involved. Does it drain bioelectrical energy, or is it something more exotic like consciousness itself?" Professor Veltar stared at him. The human was asking scientific questions about an entity that had caused the extinction of 3 major galactic civilizations. He was curious about its feeding mechanism. "The method is not important," she said. "What matters is that it kills. It kills everything. When a Void Reaper appears, entire species flee to other galaxies. But that's exactly what makes it interesting," Jake continued. "I mean, from a physics standpoint, draining energy across light-years would require some kind of faster-than-light connection. Maybe quantum entanglement on a massive scale? Or perhaps it uses some form of dimensional bridging to bypass normal space. One of the Zolorian students looked at Jake with wide, unblinking eyes. "How can you talk about it like that?" she whispered. "That thing is death itself." Jake turned to look at her. "Well, yeah, it's dangerous. But it's also really cool from a scientific perspective. I mean, multi-dimensional beings that can affect matter across interstellar distances? That's the kind of thing that could revolutionize our understanding of physics." The professor's control panel chimed softly. She looked down at it and saw that she had received a priority message from the Academy administration. She opened it quickly. The message was from Dean Korthek. "Professor Veltar, we have received reports that your xenobiology class has caused 17 students to seek medical attention for panic attacks. Please explain." Professor Veltar looked around her nearly empty classroom. She looked at her remaining students who were still traumatized by the images she had shown them. Then she looked at Jake Morrison, who was sketching diagrams of multi-dimensional geometry in his notebook. "Jake Morrison," she said slowly, "do you understand that these creatures I have shown you represent the worst nightmares of galactic civilization?" Jake looked up from his notes. "Oh, absolutely, they're definitely dangerous. I wouldn't want to run into any of them in a dark alley." He paused. "Well, except maybe the Void Reaper. You probably wouldn't even see that one coming since it exists in dimensions we can't perceive." "Then why are you not afraid?" the professor demanded. Jake considered the question seriously. "I guess because being afraid would not help me understand them better. Fear makes you stupid. It makes you run away instead of learning. And these things are too interesting to just run away from." Professor Veltar felt something she had never experienced before in her 30 years of teaching. She felt confused and slightly unnerved by one of her students. The human's complete lack of appropriate fear was somehow more disturbing than the monsters she had been showing the class. "Perhaps," she said slowly, "we should discuss why you are not afraid. What kind of world did you come from, Jake Morrison, that makes you view galactic horrors as merely interesting?" Jake looked around the classroom and noticed for the first time that most of his classmates had left. The ones who remained looked traumatized. Crix was still curled up on the floor. "Did I do something wrong?" he asked. "I was just curious about how they work." Professor Veltar walked to her desk and pulled out a secure data tablet. She entered her authorization codes and accessed the restricted files about Earth and its dominant species. "Class," she announced, "I think it is time we learned about a different kind of predator, one that some of you have been sitting next to for 3 months." She turned her screen toward the class and began to read from the file about humans and their homeworld. Professor Veltar cleared her throat and began to read from the restricted file. "Species designation, human. Planet of origin, Earth. Sol system. Classification, apex predator. Class 12, Deathworlder." The remaining students in the classroom turned to stare at Jake. He looked confused by the sudden attention. "Physical capabilities." The professor continued reading. "Binocular predator vision optimized for tracking moving prey. Persistence hunting ability allowing pursuit of prey across continental distances. Bite force of 162 pounds per square inch, sufficient to crush bone." Crix slowly uncurled from his ball on the floor and looked at Jake with new terror in his large eyes. "You're a predator?" he squeaked. Jake blinked. "Well, technically, yes. Humans are omnivores, so we eat both plants and meat. But most of us get our food from stores now, not by hunting." "Biological adaptations," Professor Veltar read on. "Forward-facing eyes provide exceptional depth perception for tracking prey. Opposable thumbs allow for tool creation and weapon manipulation. Adrenaline response system provides temporary superhuman strength and speed during combat situations." The 3 Zolorian students huddled together, their pale skin becoming even whiter. One of them whispered, "He has predator eyes." "How did we not notice the predator eyes?" Jake touched his face. "My eyes? What's wrong with my eyes?" "Planetary environment," the professor continued. "Earth is classified as a Class 12 death world. Gravity is 1.3 times galactic standard. atmosphere contains 21% oxygen, creating a highly combustible environment. Weather systems include Category 5 hurricanes, tornadoes, lightning storms, and temperature variations ranging from -80 to +70 degrees Celsius. Zara's crystalline body began to flicker through rapid color changes again. In her light language, she was repeating the same phrase over and over. Impossible, impossible, impossible. Native life forms, the professor read, her voice becoming quieter. Earth supports over 8.7 million species, with an estimated 99% of all species that have ever existed now extinct due to natural selection pressures. Current apex predators include creatures with bite forces exceeding 3,000 pounds per square inch, venoms capable of killing large mammals within minutes, and predators that hunt in coordinated packs. Jake was starting to understand why everyone was looking at him strangely. Look, I know Earth is kind of a tough place, but you adapt to it. It's not that bad once you're used to it. Dietary habits, Professor Veltar continued. Humans regularly consume other predator species as food sources. Common meals include sharks, large cats, bears, venomous reptiles, and various toxic marine life. They have developed cooking methods specifically to neutralize deadly toxins in their food supply. One of the Zalorian students fainted. Another started hyperventilating. You eat predators? Crix whispered from the floor. You eat things that eat other things? Sometimes, Jake admitted. I mean, bacon comes from pigs, and pigs will eat almost anything. And fish like tuna are definitely predators, but we also eat a lot of vegetables and grains. Social structure, the professor read. Humans are pack hunters who have developed complex hierarchical societies. They demonstrate extreme loyalty to their pack members and will fight to the death to protect their young and their territory. They have successfully domesticated other predator species to assist in hunting and defense. Wait, what? Jake sat up straighter. We domesticated. Predators? Oh, you mean dogs? Yeah, dogs used to be wolves, but that was like 15,000 years ago. They're not really predators anymore, they're pets. Pets? Zara flickered a confused pattern of lights. You keep predators as companions? Well, sure. Dogs, cats, ferrets. Some people even keep snakes and lizards. My sister back home has a pet tarantula named Charlie. The classroom fell silent except for the sound of Crix whimpering. Professor Veltar kept reading. Combat capabilities. Humans possess an unusual combination of predatory instincts and advanced reasoning ability. They are capable of strategic thinking during violent encounters and have developed sophisticated weapons technology. Their military history shows consistent success against superior numbers through tactical innovation and psychological warfare. Jake was starting to feel uncomfortable. Professor, this makes us sound pretty scary. I mean, most humans are peaceful. We don't just go around hunting things anymore. Psychological profile, the professor read. Humans display remarkable adaptability to extreme stress situations. They have been observed laughing in the face of mortal danger, treating life-threatening situations as entertainment and showing curiosity about creatures that other species flee from. Everyone in the room turned to look at Jake again. He had spent the entire class period asking scientific questions about creatures that had terrified everyone else. Oh, Jake said quietly. He finally understood what had been happening. You were trying to scare me. Professor Veltar closed the file and looked at him. Yes, Jake Morrison. I was trying to teach you and your classmates about the most dangerous predators in the galaxy. I was trying to show you what true terror looks like. Jake thought about this for a moment. Then, despite the tense atmosphere in the room, he started to laugh. It wasn't a mean laugh or a threatening laugh. It was the sound of genuine amusement, like someone had just told him a really good joke. The sound echoed in the quiet classroom. I'm sorry, he said, still chuckling. I'm not laughing at you or anyone else. It's just, this is all a big misunderstanding. Crix managed to get back into his chair, though he was still trembling. What kind of misunderstanding? Jake looked around at his frightened classmates and felt something he had not expected. He felt protective of them. These weren't threats or prey. These were his friends, and they were scared. You're all afraid of me now, he said gently. But I would never hurt any of you, that's not what humans do. Jake stood up slowly from his chair, making sure his movements were calm and non-threatening. His classmates watched him nervously, but he kept his voice gentle and steady. I think there's something important that File didn't mention, he said. Yes, humans are predators. Yes, we come from a dangerous world. But the most important thing about humans is that we choose who we protect. He walked over to where Crix was sitting and knelt down next to the Quillen's chair. Crix flinched but didn't run away. Crix, do you remember 3 weeks ago when those Vargan students were picking on you in the cafeteria? Jake asked softly. Do you remember what I did? Crix's nose twitched as he thought. You made them stop. You told them to leave me alone. Right. And did I hurt them? No, Crix said slowly. You just talked to them. You made them understand that what they were doing was wrong. Jake nodded. That's what humans really do. We protect the people we care about. All those predator instincts, all that strength and toughness, we use it to keep our friends and family safe. He turned to face the rest of the class. The file Professor Veltar read was accurate, but it was incomplete. It told you what humans can do, but it didn't tell you what we choose to do. Zara flickered a hesitant pattern of lights. In her language, she was asking, how do we know you won't hurt us? Jake had been learning to read Vorthan light patterns. Because you're part of my pack now, he said. I know that sounds weird to you, but that's how human brains work. Once we consider someone part of our group, we would rather die than let harm come to them. Professor Veltar had been listening carefully. But the file mentions your species' history of warfare and violence. Against other humans, yes, Jake admitted. And that's something we're not proud of. But even in our worst wars, we had rules about protecting civilians and treating prisoners with dignity. And as we've grown more civilized, we've gotten better at solving conflicts without fighting. One of the Zalorian students spoke up. But you eat predators. How can you be peaceful if you eat other hunters? Jake smiled. That's actually a perfect example of what I mean. On Earth, we learned that the best way to get meat wasn't to hunt wild predators. It was to take care of animals, feed them, protect them from other predators, and give them good lives. We became protectors first, hunters second. He gestured toward the hologram projector. All those creatures Professor Veltar showed us, they're dangerous because they only know how to destroy. Humans learned something different. We learned that taking care of others makes us stronger than just being able to fight. Crix was starting to look less frightened. Is that why you weren't scared of the monsters? Partly, Jake said, but also because fear makes you stupid. If you're going to protect people from dangerous things, you need to understand how those things work. You can't fight an enemy you don't understand. Professor Veltar was taking notes of her own now. This is remarkable. Your species developed predatory capabilities but chose to use them for protection rather than domination. Well, mostly, Jake said honestly. We're not perfect. Some humans still choose to be selfish or cruel. But most of us learned that cooperation works better than competition. He walked back to his seat and pulled out his tablet. Professor, would it be okay if I showed the class something from Earth? Professor Veltar nodded, curious about what the human would share. Jake activated his tablet's hologram function. A three-dimensional image appeared showing a large human settlement. But instead of the military installations or hunting grounds the aliens might have expected, it showed a city full of parks and gardens. Humans walked alongside various Earth animals, many of them clearly predators that had been domesticated. This is my hometown, Jake explained. Those are dogs playing with human children. Dogs are descended from wolves, which were pack hunters, but we didn't conquer them or destroy them. We made them our partners. The image changed to show humans working in agricultural fields alongside animals that looked like small dinosaurs. Those are chickens. They're descended from jungle predators, but we take care of them and they provide us with eggs and meat. Another image showed humans swimming in an ocean filled with large creatures that looked like they could easily kill a person. Those are whales. They're some of the largest predators on Earth, but they don't hunt humans. We learn to coexist. with them. Zara's light patterns shifted to something that Jake recognized as curiosity rather than fear. You make partnerships with other predators? Whenever possible, Jake said. It's better than fighting. Fighting means someone gets hurt. Cooperation means everyone benefits. Professor Veltar was staring at the images with fascination. Your species has essentially created a planet-wide ecosystem based on mutual protection and benefit. That's the idea, Jake said. It doesn't always work perfectly, but it works better than the alternative. Crix raised his hand tentatively. Jake, if humans are protectors, why did you find those monsters interesting instead of frightening? Jake thought about how to explain it. Because understanding dangerous things helps me figure out how to protect people from them. The Void Reaper, for example. If we understood how its energy-draining ability works, maybe we could develop defenses against it. One of the Zalorian students who had been quiet spoke up. You would fight a Void Reaper to protect others? If I had to, Jake said simply. That's what humans do. We face dangerous things so that others don't have to. The classroom was quiet for a long moment. Then Crix stood up and walked over to Jake's desk. Jake, would you help me understand those creatures too? I want to be brave like you. Jake smiled. You're already brave, Crix. You stayed in class even when you were scared. That's the bravest thing of all. Professor Veltar saved her notes and looked around the classroom. I think perhaps I have been teaching xenobiology incorrectly. Jake, Morrison, would you be willing to help me design a new curriculum? I'd be honored to help, Jake said. As the class period ended and students began to gather their belongings, something had fundamentally changed in the room. The fear was gone, replaced by curiosity and a new kind of respect. Zara approached Jake's desk, her crystal body glowing with warm, friendly colors. Jake, some of my people are coming to visit the academy next month. Would you be willing to meet with them? I think they would benefit from understanding humans better. Of course, Jake said. I'd like to meet them. As they left the classroom together, Professor Veltar realized that she had learned more about effective diplomacy and interspecies relations in the past hour than she had in her entire career. The human had shown her that true strength came not from the ability to destroy, but from the wisdom to know when to protect, when to teach, and when to simply extend friendship to someone who was afraid. Outside in the hallway, other students, who had fled the class earlier, saw Jake walking with his classmates, all of them talking and laughing together. Word began to spread throughout the academy that perhaps the humans were not the monsters some had believed them to be. They were something far more remarkable. They were guardians who had learned to turn their predatory heritage into a force for protection and cooperation across the galaxy.